Hey guys, tonight we take a quiet walk back into ancient Rome, not through the crowded forums or thunderous colosseums, but through the damp, echoing underbelly of the city. Imagine the sound of trickling water, the dim flicker of your torch, casting shadows across ancient stone. You're not a gladiator, not a senator, not even a baker. No, tonight you are a Roman Aqueduct Inspector. Your job is important, technically. It's just not the kind of job they write scrolls about. By the time you've wrapped your rough wool tunic around yourself, the streets of Rome are still mostly asleep. The city hasn't fully stirred yet. Just a few bakers shoving dough into outdoor ovens, and the occasional donkey cart rattling over the cobbles. Your sandals slap gently against the ground as you trudge toward the first checkpoint. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow the same path you've walked for 20 years, down the slope behind the Temple of Mars, past the wine cellar's alley that always smells faintly of sour grapes and ambition. You nod at an old lady, sweeping her steps with the slow resignation of someone who's accepted that marble just attracts more dust. You reach your inspection point, a covered sluice just beneath the forum baths. The air is damp and earthy, with a hint of warm stone. You crouch, fingers brushing over the carved markers left by inspectors centuries ago. Someone named Sextus left a funny little fish carved beside his initials. You run your hand across it each time. A silent good morning to a long-gone colleague who probably also hated waking up this early. As you open the small maintenance hatch, a rush of cool air sighs up into your face. The aqueduct is quiet today. The water flows with the even tempo of a well-conducted choir. You crouch and peer inside, watching for telltale signs. A change in color, a sluggish swirl, a floating reed that shouldn't be there. You remember your training, what little of it there was. Mostly your supervisor had just pointed at things and said bad or fine until you picked it up. Historians still argue whether Rome had a standardized training method for inspectors, or whether it was more of a bring your nephew to work kind of system. You carry a leather satchel of essential tools, a small chisel, a wax tablet, a bit of string, a bronze level you haven't cleaned in years, and a bit of dried sausage in case your lunch gets delayed. There's also your badge of office, a tiny lead medallion stamped with the Aqueduct Authority's seal. You've dropped it in a drain twice. Your next stop is a shadowy corridor leading toward a branch pipe serving the Calian Hill. It's dim in here, and a rat scampers past with the confidence of a senator in debt. You mumble a half-hearted salve and keep walking. The stone walls here are mossy, a little too wet for comfort. You kneel again, pressing your palm to the wall to check for warmth. Moisture means trouble. Warmth means a possible crack, maybe even a tiny leak. You frown. The stone here feels just a touch warmer than it should. You scratch a small X into the wall and note it on your tablet. That's Flavius's zone tomorrow. Lucky him. Back outside, the sun is barely cresting the rooftops. You watch a pigeon trying to woo a tile for several minutes. That's the pace of your work. Deliberate, observant, extremely slow. You remember a saying, fast work makes fast floods. Or maybe you made that up. Either way, it sounds wise. Your route takes you along a maintenance path, lined with low hedges and fig trees. A boy runs past you, barefoot and sticky with honey, chased by a girl carrying a stick and some very specific grievances. You step aside, adjusting your satchel, your shoulders already sore from the weight. A small shrine stands nearby, dedicated to the water nymph Egeria. You pause, muttering a quiet blessing. Not out of piety, really, but because last time you didn't. Your sandal snapped, and you had to limp home in shame. You place a pebble on the shrine and tap the wood beam twice. Old habits. You think briefly about what it might have been like to have a different life. A merchant, maybe, or a teacher. But then again, merchants have to smile too much, and teachers deal with teenagers. At least here, underground, the water never talks back. You reach a final sluice before your mid-morning break, crouching to watch the flow. A thin vine has crept in through a crack and trails lazily in the current. You make a mental note to report it, but also kind of admire its persistence. A colleague once told you the aqueducts were the veins of Rome. You nodded at the time, but now you think it's more like a really stubborn digestive tract, always processing, always flowing, never quite clean. The sun is higher now, lighting the clay tiles above you in bright gold. A breeze stirs your tunic. Somewhere, a street musician hits a sour note on his lyre. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the hum of water lull your thoughts into soft, dull waves. You still have 12 more stops today, but for now, there's just this moment. You, the water, and the slow, steady rhythm of Rome's forgotten lifeline. Your next task involves a stone corridor that dips slightly, enough to make your knees ache as you descend. You clutch your wax tablet in one hand, your small bronze level in the other, squinting at the walls to assess moisture level. Today, you're on what's affectionately known among the inspectors as the damp loop. This stretch has a reputation, not for major disasters, but for being persistently, infuriatingly soggy. You kneel again, placing the level along the stone base. The bubble inside the glass tube wiggles gently before resting just slightly off-center. It's not enough to raise alarm, but enough to make a note. Flavius will want to argue about this, as he always does. Flavius insists that ancient limescale deposits are sacred indicators, and he often speaks to the stones as if they'll talk back. You run your hand along the wall. Moist. Again. You tap it twice, mostly for emphasis. Then reach into your satchel for the chalk stick. A white mark, 2 fingers above the base. You also sketch a wobbly dolphin beside it, your signature flourish. Historians still argue whether Roman inspectors marked their areas with symbols for clarity, or whether you're just bored and a little too fond of sea creatures. From down the hall, you hear the telltale shuffle of sandals. It's Flavius, unmistakably whistling a tune that never seems to resolve into any known melody. He turns the corner with a wide grin and a scroll tucked under one arm. "Morning?" he says, not breaking stride. "The spirits say the pipe speaks truth today." You blink at him. "It's leaking." "That's what it said." He seems triumphant, as if vindicated. You watch him pull out a small stylus and note something on his tablet, then mutter something about minor blessings. You leave him to his musings and continue your rounds. Your next check involves standing absolutely still for several minutes in silence, just to hear the flow of water. If it gurgles oddly, you log it. If it hums, that's fine. If you hear rats fighting, well, that's neither here nor there. Your nose twitches. The air smells metallic, iron, mixed with a hint of mildew. It's subtle, but it's there. You sniff again, then crouch to peer into a narrow junction. The walls shimmer faintly. Condensation. You reach out to touch it. Definitely damp, but oddly warm. You take a scrap of wool cloth from your bag and gently wipe a section. Underneath, a thin pinkish stain has bloomed across the stone, like a bruise. Iron, maybe. Algae, possibly. Or perhaps just time, wearing down color into strange hues. You jot it all down on the wax tablet, frowning at how close you're getting to the edge of your writing space. Roman wax tablets weren't designed for long-winded people. A lizard scurries across your path, then pauses to look at you. You stare at each other for a moment. Its tiny throat pulses. You blink first. By now, the corridor has narrowed. This section was retrofitted decades ago, after a partial collapse. The arch above your head looks like it was designed by someone who'd never met a straight line. The stones form an awkward lean, and you always duck slightly, even though there's enough clearance. It's habit, really. You crouch and press your palm flat to the floor. It's cool and smooth, the telltale sign of proper water flow below. No bulging stones, no warm spots, no strange vibrations. You pause and smile to yourself. Finally, a stretch behaving as it should. As you scribble your notes, a question lingers in the back of your mind. What happens if you stop caring? What if no one inspects this section for weeks? Do the stones sigh in relief? Or do they shift quietly, slowly, growing weaker with no one to notice? You shake off the thought, not because it's untrue, but because it's far too poetic for someone currently kneeling in a damp hallway with sore feet and a half-squashed fig in their bag. You make your way out of the corridor, blinking as sunlight catches you off guard. You forgot how bright it gets out here. Rome is well awake now. Markets bustling, dogs barking, children yelling very specific insults. A man carrying 3 amphorae wobbles past you, muttering about taxes. You nod politely, though you don't know him. It's just something people do. Acknowledge each other in the quiet agreement that, yes, life is ongoing and mildly inconvenient. You check your wax tablet again. Only 2 more readings before lunch. You allow yourself a small moment of joy. Lunch today means lentils again, but at least they'll be your lentils, not Flavius's strange barley mash that smells like it already gave up. You stop near a corner joint of 2 aqueduct branches and lean in. There's a low gurgle, steady, rhythmic. Good. You watch the flow for a full minute, mentally comparing it to yesterday. Seems slightly faster, but maybe that's just your imagination. One of the quirks of this job is how time stretches. Minutes feel like hours. Hours feel like a week. But somehow, days vanish. You've worked here for 2 decades and can't remember more than a dozen standout moments. You once stepped on a snake. That counts. You tap your chisel gently against the stone as you stand. A small ritual again. Not for the gods. Well, maybe partly. But for yourself. A sound that says, I was here. I saw this. It flowed. One last bend. One last mark. You draw another chalk circle around a moist patch and etch a note beside it. Monitor. That's Roman for I don't know. Maybe check again later. Your stomach growls softly as you rise and dust off your knees. Time for lunch, or at least a moment of sitting in the sun and pretending the stone you sit on isn't shaped like an angry turtle. Lunch, as always, is a modest affair. You found a flat stone at the edge of a low retaining wall near the aqueduct's surface run. One of those lovely above-ground stretches where the arches tower like polite sentinels. There's a bit of shade from a laurel tree, and the stone radiates the perfect amount of warmth through your tunic's thin fabric. You pull out your tightly wrapped packet of cold lentils, unwrapping the linen with a quiet sigh. Flavius arrives moments later, carrying something that smells deeply questionable and wrapped in what might be last week's Senate edict. He chews thoughtfully, eyes scanning the horizon, as if pretending to be noble-born. You don't speak at first. Neither of you ever does, until at least halfway through the meal. It's one of those unspoken inspector rules. Eventually, he clears his throat. I'm thinking of installing a sundial on my cart, he says, as if this is a normal midday declaration. You nod slowly, not looking up from your lentils. Because you're always late? No, he says. Because I'm always early and need proof. You nod again, chewing. This, you realize, is your daily dose of conversational chaos. Behind you, water rushes faintly through the aqueduct's channel. You can hear it through the open vent. A calm, steady flow. You stretch your legs and let the silence press in again. Suddenly, your eyes catch a crack in the arch overhead. Small but jagged. Not part of the original design. You nudge Flavius with your elbow. He squints up. Ah, he says, mouth full. Stress fissure, or lightning, or spiteful pigeons. Historians still argue whether microfractures like that were caused by shifting foundations or bad masonry. Either way, someone's going to yell. You toss the last of your lentils to a bold squirrel who's been inching closer. It accepts the offering with disdain and immediately buries it nearby, perhaps for winter, or as a protest. You rise and dust off your knees again. Back to work. The next location is less scenic. It's a low crawl space that connects 2 sections beneath the Via Appia. You crouch and duck beneath the arch, instantly regretting the heavy lentils. The air shifts around you, stale, with the distinct tang of limestone and old water. This is where things often go unnoticed. No senator ever tours this part. There are no mosaics, no carved dedications, just silence, damp stone, and the constant echo of dripping water. You shine your small oil lamp along the walls, checking for mineral buildup. A thick patch of yellowish calcite clings to the corner. You run a finger along it, flaky. You scrape a bit away with your chisel and watch it tumble like powder. Harmless, but ugly. You mark it for cosmetic scraping. Not urgent, but annoying. The kind of task given to new recruits, or those recently demoted for accidentally insulting someone's toga. You sigh and move deeper into the dim bend where air doesn't flow well. It's here you find a strange mark etched into the wall, 3 dots and a crooked line. Not Roman, possibly Etruscan, or possibly a bored teenager from 2 centuries ago. Flavius will say it's a blessing. You think it looks like a very bad fish. A rat squeaks and darts past your feet. It's unusually fluffy. You name it Gaius, and wish it well. Back outside, you emerge, blinking into the daylight. The sun has shifted higher now, casting sharp shadows against the city's taller structures. A hawker yells about oysters in the distance, and someone's goat appears to be stuck in a fruit stall. Typical midday chaos. You check your wax tablet again. 2 more joints to inspect before you head toward the junction near the Palatine. Your route takes you past a retired legionary who sells fried chickpeas from a brazier. He nods as you pass. You nod back. He has 1 leg and the most perfectly waxed mustache you've ever seen. You've never spoken, but there's an unspoken respect between those who spend their days around things that could collapse. At the next stop, you crouch beside a slanted channel. The water here is unusually fast. You frown, press your ear to the stone, rushing definitely. Maybe a blockage downstream, or someone flushed something they shouldn't have. Again, you'll have to follow the line later. You tap a quick note on your tablet. Investigate velocity. Maybe olives again. Historians still argue whether olive pits were a common aqueduct obstruction or just a favorite scapegoat for lazy maintenance. Your knees crack as you stand, and you mutter a curse about aging. Flavius, now several paces behind, shouts something cheerful about knees being just decorative hinges. You ignore him. You stop at the next joint. This one is familiar. It's the site where you once lost your sandal during a sudden downpour. The current pulled it down a side channel, and you spent the afternoon limping like a wounded satyr. The replacement sandal never quite fit right. You kneel again, press your hand to the stone. Cool, dry, and smooth. You smile, and then, without warning, the chalk in your satchel snaps in half. You sigh again. Another thing to add to the list. Request new chalk. Again. The last stop is a benchmarked arch with a small inscription from the reign of Emperor Claudius. You read it each time out of habit. It talks about purity, precision, and the divine flow of water. A sentiment that sounds noble, even if you know the people who wrote it probably never touched a muddy sluice in their lives. You trace the lettering gently, then scratch a tiny mark beneath it. Your secret addition, your tiny rebellion. A small circle, your signature, the symbol that says, I was here. It flowed as the sun climbs toward its peak. The temperature rises, and the stones underfoot begin to radiate a slow, relentless heat. You make your way to one of the inspection alcoves tucked behind a small basilica, where shadow still lingers like a polite guest who knows not to overstay. The stone bench here is sloped, but manageable. You sit and stretch your back, which makes a noise like someone stepping on a small wicker basket. Your midday routine includes reviewing the morning's notes. You unroll your wax tablet, still slightly warm from your tunic pocket, and begin reading through the careful scratches of your stylus. Crack, possible iron bloom, mysterious fish symbol, Gaius the rat. All standard fare, nothing urgent, nothing dramatic. Then you hear it, the faint whistle of Flavius. It bounces oddly off the stone corridor, an off-key reminder that he is, as always, not far behind. Moments later, his face emerges from the shadow, wearing that triumphant grin, reserved for people who've just remembered a fact no one asked for. "I've discovered something new about calcite," he announces, wiping his brow with the enthusiasm of someone who doesn't actually sweat. "It grows in layers, like onions, or emperors." You arch an eyebrow. "That's not new." "New to me," he shrugs. Then more seriously, he gestures toward the path ahead. "Crack in the Pigna junction. Big one. We're diverting." You stand reluctantly. The Pigna junction is notorious, not because it's dangerous, but because it's cursed with bureaucratic foot traffic. Every time someone important visits the aqueducts, they come through here, which means someone always tries to make it look cleaner, and in doing so, someone else breaks something. As you approach the junction, the air changes, slightly cooler, a little more metallic. You pause. Something smells not right, like stone dust mixed with wet parchment. You glance at Flavius, who sniffs the air and grimaces. "Cracks bleeding," he mutters. The stone ahead is pale and dry, except for one thin vein of red-brown moisture crawling from a fissure. You crouch to examine it. The color is unsettling, but the source is clear. It's a rust trickle from a corroded bronze clamp embedded too close to the surface, probably placed decades ago when a senator's cousin insisted on modern reinforcements. You prod the clamp with your chisel. It wobbles. "You think it'll hold?" Flavius asks, though his tone suggests he already knows the answer. You lean closer. "Nope." With a grunt, you pull out a strip of linen from your bag and wrap it around the clamp for temporary stability. Then you use the flat edge of your level to wedge a small bit of wood in the gap. It's not permanent, but it'll give the repair crew a chance to do it properly, assuming they ever get your report, assuming they can read your wax tablet. You note the crack, the clamp, and the makeshift patch. Then, out of habit, you sketch a fish again beside it. It's lopsided. You sigh. Lunch is technically over, but you linger near the junction a bit longer, watching the water ripple through the carved channel. This section was built under Augustus, if the inscriptions are right. You imagine the workers back then, sweaty, tired, probably underpaid. You feel a quiet kinship with them, though you doubt any of them had to argue with bureaucrats about chalk budgets. A group of children passes by above you, chasing a small dog. Their laughter filters down through the vent holes, echoing oddly against the stone. It's strange hearing joy in this place. Not unpleasant, just unexpected. You and Flavius split ways temporarily. He heads west to check a valve you both suspect doesn't exist. You continue eastward, toward the inspection steps that lead down to the oldest part of the system. This section is rarely visited, not because it's particularly bad, but because it's tedious. The steps are narrow and slightly curved, and they smell like wet sandals. As you descend, your torch flickers and sputters. You mutter encouragement to it. It does not respond. Down here, the aqueduct stones are blackened with age. The mortar crumbles if you breathe too hard on it, but the water still flows. That's the thing about Roman engineering. Often surprisingly durable, even when slapped together in a hurry with optimism and volcanic ash. You kneel again, testing the surface for warmth. Nothing. Good. You press your ear to the wall. Another old trick. And hear the flow, steady and fast. No gurgles, no echoes, no groans. Just a long, wet whisper. You allow yourself a smile. The air is cooler here. You could nap. In fact, one of your predecessors did nap down here once. He slipped into such a deep sleep, he missed his own retirement banquet. A legend in your circles. There's even a small, awkward poem carved into the stone in his honor. You read it aloud. Here lay Marcus, asleep not dead, missed his bread, but kept his head. Beautiful. You hear a clink behind you. Probably your stylus, falling out of your bag again. You turn to retrieve it and notice a beetle marching confidently across your sandal. You watch it for a moment before gently redirecting it to safer terrain. No sense squashing an innocent bystander. You finish your inspection and start the slow climb back up. Your knees crack again. Like small applause from inside your joints, the sun has moved slightly, casting new shadows as you emerge. You blink and stretch. One more stop before the shortcut through Subura. You glance at your wax tablet and shake your head. The notes are already starting to blur. The wax is too warm. You'll have to rewrite the last section tonight, possibly after dinner. You make a mental note to stop by the scribe's stall for fresh wax. Your chisel clinks softly in your satchel as you walk. Your thoughts drift. You think about how little things change. Water still flows. Stone still cracks. People still think your job is boring. And honestly, they're not wrong. But it's your kind of boring. Quiet, necessary, almost meditative. You pass a market stall selling figs. You consider buying some, then remember the last time you did that. The vendor tried to pay you in pebbles. You nod politely and keep walking. You decide to take the shortcut through Subura, despite every instinct in your body telling you not to. Subura, Rome's most chaotic and famously fragrant neighborhood, is a place where goats roam freely. Musicians argue with each other, using flutes, and someone is always selling something they shouldn't be. But it shaves off a good half hour from your route, and your knees are lobbying for shorter workdays. The first few steps into the district are deceptively quiet. A laundry line stretches overhead, dripping onto the cracked pavement. A cat balances on the archway above you, its tail flicking like it's judging your life choices. You nod solemnly at it and proceed. The streets are tight, the buildings leaning in as if trying to overhear each other's gossip. You pass a bakery with an oven set far too close to the street, where heat waves shimmer through an open window, and someone inside sings about bread in a language you don't quite recognize. A child barrels past you, shrieking with joy, while his mother hollers after him with the full authority of a woman who has chased this child every day for 7 years. You step aside just in time to avoid being caught in a flying chicken's trajectory. Not a metaphor. A literal chicken is launched from a nearby cart, flapping indignantly. This is your shortcut. You pull your tunic tighter and hug the edge of the wall, skirting a suspicious puddle and avoiding a man selling magic beans that are clearly just pebbles dyed with wine. He tries to make eye contact, but you are trained. You look past him with the practiced indifference of someone who's inspected moldy tunnels for 2 decades. Your destination is a small inspection hatch tucked behind an apothecary. It's narrow, obscured by ivy, and often used by neighborhood dogs as a shade spot. Today, a small mutt is curled beside it, snoring softly. You crouch nearby, whispering an apology, and gently shift the ivy aside. The hatch creaks open, revealing a damp descent into one of the older feeder lines. You brace yourself and begin the short climb down, the cool air greeting you like an old friend with slightly damp hands. Inside, the smell is familiar, mineral-rich, mossy, with a faint trace of garlic from the apothecary's herbs above. You duck inside, lighting your torch again. The walls here are narrower, closer together, and lined with the original Roman mortar, a mixture of lime, volcanic ash, and whatever else they had lying around. Historians still argue whether this mix was a result of scientific precision or sheer accident. Whatever the reason, it's held up remarkably well. You place your hand on the wall, feeling for vibrations. There's a soft hum. Good. The water flows smoothly. You move forward, checking for cracks, discoloration, or any signs of root intrusion. There's a patch of algae, bright green and glistening in your torchlight. You scrape off a sample and make a note. Algae persistent. Recommend visit from vinegar team. You reach a junction valve. It's rusted but intact. You test it gently, feeling the resistance of metal that hasn't moved in months. It lets out a soft groan, like it too would prefer to be asleep right now. You sympathize. As you stand, something small plops beside your foot. You jump slightly, then look down. It's a frog, not uncommon down here. This one is particularly round, and stares at you with mild disapproval. You bow slightly. Your canal, good sir. You exit back into Sabura with the slow dignity of someone who's been sweating in silence for the better part of an hour. The dog outside your hatch hasn't moved. You leave it a piece of your fig ration, half chewed but heartfelt, navigating back through the tangle of Sabura. You overhear a heated debate between 2 old men about the proper way to pickle onions. One insists on honey, the other curses at vinegar like it personally betrayed him. You nod at them both and keep moving. A woman tries to sell you a cursed amulet shaped like a dolphin. For a split second, you consider it, then remember your drawing habits and decide it's probably not a good idea to tempt fate. Finally, you emerge from the chaos into a quieter lane near the edge of the Aventine. The noise of Sabura fades behind you, replaced by the gentle murmur of distant fountains and the faint whistle of wind through cypress trees. You check your wax tablet. Sabura branch inspection. Complete. Algae noted. Valve functional. Frog interaction. Neutral. You draw a tiny frog beside the text. Flavius will ask about it. You'll lie and say it's a map symbol. You sit briefly on a low wall, letting your muscles relax. The sun peeks out from behind a tall building, warming your shoulders. You lean back and exhale slowly. This life is not glamorous. There are no parades for aqueduct inspectors, no plays written about the men who crouch in shadows, listening for the sound of drips. But there's peace in the rhythm, a certain sleepy dignity in the constancy of stone and water. You run your hand over the smooth surface beside you. The aqueduct continues, silent and essential. You'll follow it again tomorrow, and the day after that, and maybe, if you're lucky, you'll finally get reassigned to the stretch near the vineyards. Until then, there is still more to check. Always more. You're still brushing the last traces of Sabura dust from your tunic when you see him. Publius Junius Crispinus, or as you and Flavius like to call him, Senator's nephew with too much time. He stands at the junction arch like he's lost and too proud to ask for directions, holding a scroll too long for the message it likely contains, and wearing a tunic too white for someone near a water channel. You sigh inwardly. Surprise visits are not uncommon, but they rarely end with anything fixed. Just more wax tablet work, more idle questions, and at least one comment about how water is so mysterious, don't you think? He spots you and waves with a kind of cheerful confidence reserved for people who've never scrubbed lime scale off a wall. Aquarius, he calls. I have come to learn the craft. You blink slowly. The craft? Yes, yes, he says, bounding over. My uncle says I need practical experience, something about humility and the foundations of Rome. He says foundations, like it's a riddle. You gesture vaguely toward the inspection hatch. There's a damp wall in there with a crack. You wanted to take notes? His eyes widen. Cracks. Fascinating. You pass him a spare wax tablet and stylus, watching with mild interest as he turns it over twice, like he's unsure which side writes. He follows you inside, and within 3 steps, he slips. Not badly, just enough to yelp and fling the tablet, which lands in a puddle. You retrieve it and shake it off, chalking the moment up as his first, and likely last, field lesson. Inside, you explain water gradients. He squints at the flow. It looks level. You nod. That's the point. He scribbles something on the tablet. Possibly a doodle. Possibly his grocery list. You move to the wall and begin your usual inspection. Fingers against stone, ear listening for resonance. The senator's nephew mimics you, but ends up with his ear pressed against the part where the moss grows thickest. He sneezes violently. Ugh, that smell. That, you say patiently, is history. Historians still argue whether mossy smells in Roman infrastructure indicated neglect or simply nature reclaiming her territory. Either way, the senator's nephew does not look convinced. You finish your inspection and begin logging your notes. The crack hasn't widened. The mineral trail has darkened slightly. The flow remains steady. All good signs. Meanwhile, Crispinus has wandered over to the channel's edge and is poking at the water with a stick. So this just runs all day? Yes, you reply. That's the idea. Fascinating, he mutters. And the people just trust it? You nod again. Unless it stops, then they send people like me. He turns, eyes gleaming with a kind of naive excitement. Do you ever fight sewer monsters? You consider this for a moment. Once I kicked a snake. Does that count? He gasps. Truly? It was small. Still, he seems impressed. You lead him back outside and sit beneath a shaded overhang while he scribbles something on the dry half of his tablet. He's humming to himself now. A tune that sounds suspiciously like a military march, slowed down to funeral pace. You're halfway through noting a mineral deposit when he asks, Do you think I could be an aqueduct inspector? You glance at him. His polished sandals, his uncalloused hands, the way he flinches every time a pigeon flaps nearby. You choose your words gently. Only if the cracks respect you. He nods solemnly, clearly taking this as wisdom. You'll let him keep the tablet? It's already ruined anyway. He eventually waves goodbye, promising to write a speech about unsung heroes of infrastructure. You hope he forgets. Flavius appears from behind a pillar, arms crossed, eyes twinkling. You survived. Barely, you mutter. He chuckles. He told me he's documenting the emotional energy of water. I told him to interview the lizards. The two of you continue down the path together. The sun now angles lower, casting golden lines across the pavement. The city starts to settle into its early evening hum. Street vendors argue softly. Temple bells echo faintly across rooftops. And somewhere, a baker sings about flour. You pause near an elevated channel to make a quick note. The inclines shifted slightly. Probably nothing, but worth logging. Flavius leans beside you and pulls out a dried date, offering you one. Not poisoned, he says. This time, you take it and chew slowly. It still tastes like sarcasm. Seasoned, he replies. The two of you sit there for a moment, the sound of moving water steady in your ears. It's moments like these, when no one is leaking, shouting, or sneezing moss, that the job feels almost meditative. You stretch your legs, roll your shoulders, and allow your eyes to close just for a second. A breeze stirs the leaves above, and you inhale deeply. Still water, solid stone, and no sewer monsters today. That counts as a win. The late afternoon sun hangs lazily over the rooftops as you trudge toward the edge of the Aventine slope. Your sandals, soaked once in subura and twice from mossy tunnels, squelch slightly with each step. The last stop before your evening checks is a segment notorious for smelling like boiled eggs on hot days. You can already catch a whiff on the wind. Sulfur springs, the unfortunate offspring of geology and bad luck. This stretch of aqueduct snakes close to a natural sulfur vent, and no matter how many times it's rerouted or insulated, the smell persists. It's not harmful, just unforgettable. You arrive at the inspection site, just as a small group of laundry workers from a nearby bathhouse shuffle past, giggling and holding their tunics over their noses. One of them points at the aqueduct arch and says something about Poseidon's outhouse. You pretend not to hear. You kneel, inhaling through your mouth, and begin your usual tests. The stone here has a yellowish hue, a kind of sickly pallor that makes every stain look suspicious. You run your hand across the mortar seam, feel the warmth, and frown. The vent must be more active than usual today. You chalk a mark on the wall, then crouch lower to examine a shallow cavity where condensation gathers. There's a glimmer of orange, not rust. This stuff sparkles slightly. You lean in. Ah, sulfur bloom, a strange mineral crust that forms in very specific conditions. Heat, moisture, and enough sulfur to make your eyes water. Flavius, who's been trailing behind while attempting to eat an entire fig without using his hands, finally catches up. He coughs dramatically. Ugh, what did you do to the air? I only just got here, you mutter. He leans over the cavity and squints. Ah, yes, sulfur bloom. Nature's way of saying, go home. You log the bloom and the increased warmth. There's nothing dangerously wrong yet. But if the bloom grows, it might start interfering with the flow. Or worse, it could clog the side vent that serves a small bathhouse down the hill. That would mean complaints. Long, wordy, perfumed complaints written on over-decorated scrolls. Flavius stands dramatically and addresses the wind. "O noble aqueduct, why do you turn your breath against us?" You respond without looking up. "Because someone keeps bringing figs." The two of you check a few more joints along the wall. One seam shows faint signs of expansion. You tap it gently, and a tiny flake crumbles off. Not ideal, but manageable. You jot a quick note on the wax tablet. Thermal creep. Reassess after rain. Historians still argue whether Roman engineers fully understood thermal expansion, or whether they just built things big enough to forgive their own mistakes. Either way, you owe them thanks. This particular section has held up better than expected. You move to the end of the stretch, where a viewing grate lets you peer into a downward channel. The metal mesh is warm to the touch, and the air wafting up through it could boil an egg if you gave it long enough. You don't have an egg, and frankly, you'd rather not know. You glance up and realize the sky's beginning to shift. The golden edge of evening is creeping in. The shadows grow longer. You stretch your arms, yawn, and lean against the wall. "I dreamed once," Flavius begins, "of working with cold water, mountain spring cold, maybe up north, somewhere with snow." "You hate snow," you remind him. "Yes," he says wistfully, "but I like complaining about it." The two of you sit there in quiet for a few moments, listening to the distant sound of birds and the closer, less pleasant gurgle of sulfur-accented water. Then Flavius stirs and opens his tablet. Did I tell you the new apprentice at the depot tried to purify sulfur water with rose petals? You look at him. They're calling him Pedalus now, he adds. You sigh. As the sun lowers behind the rooftops, you make a final loop around the perimeter. The sulfur site remains stable, if unpleasant. You leave a chalk X and circle it twice. The inspector's equivalent of, yes, it's gross. No, it's not broken. You and Flavius walk slowly back toward the main road, each step accompanied by the creak of tired knees and the distant clamor of Rome preparing for dinner. A tavern door bangs open nearby, and the smell of roasted onions drifts across the street. Your stomach growls. Wine tonight? Flavius asks. Only if we survive the scroll work, you reply. He nods solemnly. Scroll work first, wine second. That's the aqueduct oath. You pass under an archway where a small bust of Neptune watches silently. You nod to it. You're not sure why. It's not a religious thing, just manners. As you round the corner, Flavius pauses and sniffs the air. I think I smell sandal wax, he says. Frowning, or sheep, or both, you keep walking. Sulfur fades into the background, replaced by the more familiar smells of late-day Rome. Bread, wine, charcoal, ambition. The sulfur might bubble and bloom again tomorrow, but for now, the water flows. The cracks hold, and the breeze carries just enough sweetness to remind you there's life above the tunnels, and a bed waiting at the end of the route. Your next task leads you to a dusty storage annex behind the aqueduct office, where emergency scrolls are kept in a system that can best be described as optimistic. The room is dim, crowded with wooden shelves that lean in odd directions, and filled with the unmistakable scent of old papyrus, rat droppings, and political promises. You light a small oil lamp and step inside. The floor creaks underfoot. A cobweb brushes your cheek. You murmur a sleepy oath to Fortuna, goddess of misfiled documents, and begin your search. The drought scroll is here, somewhere. You remember seeing it last season, rolled too tightly and tied with what looked suspiciously like a shoelace. Rome hasn't had proper rain in weeks, and someone from the governor's office now demands a formal flow status update, as if the water listens to reports. You scan the shelves. Each cubby is marked in charcoal, some letters smudged, others completely melted into nothing. You spot one scroll labeled wine taxes, emergency draft, and another with simply goats in barely legible script. Neither inspires confidence. At last, tucked behind a broken tile ledger and a small clay pot containing, unhelpfully, another smaller pot, you find it. The scroll labeled Drought Protocols. Contingent revision copy. Do not amend. You open it slowly. The wax seal crumbles instantly. Inside is a mess of half-finished Latin, contradictory diagrams, and something that might be a recipe for lentil stew. You squint. The opening line reads, In eventum of aqua diminuere, it is suggested the following steps maybe probably occur. Flavius, who's been looming behind you for the past 5 minutes, offers helpful commentary. It sounds like someone wrote this during a hangover. You grunt in agreement. and try to translate. The Latin swings wildly between bureaucratic jargon and what might be tavern slang. Shut down Southern Channel only if absolutely necessary, or don't. Depends on who's asking. It's not comforting. You make your own notes. You've learned to interpret these documents more like weather patterns than legal decrees. If 3 different scrolls say possibly, that means do nothing but look serious. If one says absolutely, you double check for sarcasm. Your copy ends up being a brief summary. Water flow reduced. Source stable. Recommend mild panic if no rain by Solstice Day. Flavius pokes around the shelves. I found a tax form from Emperor Tiberius, requesting more barrels. For wine? No, he says. For hoarding rainwater. But it's next to a Kong scroll, so maybe both. You finish your report and tuck the scroll back, not bothering to reseal it. At this point, it's practically compost. You emerge into daylight blinking like a mole and squint at the sky. Still no clouds, just blue as far as the eye can see, and a few wheeling birds who look entirely too carefree. You head to the aqueduct control platform, a rarely visited perch above the city where you can survey multiple branches at once. The climb is tedious. More than 100 steps spiraling along a column built under Trajan, when Rome was very enthusiastic about stairs. At the top, the view is dizzying. Rome sprawls beneath you, rooftops red and brown, smoke curling lazily from cook fires, distant voices blending into a soft hum. You sit carefully on the edge of the platform and roll out your wax tablet. From here, you check the flow markers on several towers. Thin lines etched into the masonry indicate how much water passed at regular intervals. One line seems low, very low. You frown and compare it with last month's notes. Definitely a drop. You pull out your stylus and begin logging. Flow reduced by approx. 1/5. Southern and eastern channels affected. Recommend rationing to bathhouse if drop continues. You draw a tiny bathtub with a sad face next to it. Flavius will understand. Historians still argue whether Rome's bathhouse culture adjusted quickly to water shortages or simply bribed inspectors to look the other way. Based on your own experience, it's usually a combination of both. You stay up there a little longer, letting the breeze dry the sweat on your forehead. The sun edges lower, softening the city's edges, casting long shadows across the tiled roofs. Somewhere below, a street musician strikes a lazy tune on a lyre, slightly out of tune, but charmingly persistent. You sigh, pocket your tablet, and begin the long descent. The stairs groan beneath your feet. Each step feels like a negotiation with your knees. Back at street level, you see a courier waiting with a small pouch and a nervous expression. He hands it to you, mumbles something about express request from the grain consul, and darts off before you can ask questions. You open the pouch. Inside, dried beans, a sliver of charcoal, and a note that reads, "Water okay? Please circle 1. Yes, no, maybe." You circle maybe, add a question mark, and toss in a sprig of mint for good measure. It's the Roman way. Flavius returns from a separate route, holding a bucket filled with pebbles and one very smug-looking frog. He followed me, he says simply. You walk back toward the depot in companionable silence, your shadows stretching long across the cobbled path. The frogs sing, the pipes gurgle, the city exhales, and for now, despite the heat, despite the sulfur, despite the bureaucracy, the water still flows. As the sun dips closer to the horizon, the soft amber glow spills across Rome's rooftops, warming the fading air and casting long shadows from arches and columns. You make your way toward your final stretch of readings for the day, those dreaded sundown checks. The sundown readings are a quiet ritual, often performed alone, often botched due to failing light and melting wax. But tradition is tradition, and you find a strange comfort in this part of the routine. Fewer people on the roads now. The street vendors have started packing up. The kids are too tired to throw figs. Even the dogs are lounging with less enthusiasm. You reach the first of 3 evening inspection sites. This one lies beneath a crumbling wall, once part of a grand villa, now housing pigeons and a fig tree with suspiciously aggressive roots. You crouch and open your wax tablet, which now feels unnaturally warm. The wax has begun to soften from a full day in your satchel, causing your earlier notes to blur like wet ink in a rainstorm. You sigh. You trace over a few lines, attempting to salvage the text. The crack measurements? Gone. The flow notes from the sulfur springs? Smudged into a strange drawing that now resembles either a fish or a startled cloud. The frog sketch survived somehow. A small mercy. You kneel and begin your readings anew. You check the flow here by placing a flat reed along the channel's edge. It bends gently, bobbing in rhythm with the water's push. That's good. Slow, but steady. You add a fresh note to the clearer part of the tablet. Flow stable. Sunset lag. 0.2 finger widths. A nearby torch flickers in the wind, casting strange, dancing shadows across the carved stones. The ancient Roman builders left subtle measurement grooves here, straight lines, notches, one even etched with a poetic phrase, "Water obeys when stone remembers." You've traced it 100 times, still haven't decided if it's brilliant or just smug. You rise, brush off your tunic, and head toward the second site. This one sits deeper, down a small slope, tucked between 2 temples, one still in use, the other now home to an old man who claims to be Jupiter's footman. You nod to him as you pass. He offers you a raisin. You politely decline. This channel section is narrow and arched overhead, creating an echo chamber where the flow sounds louder, more present. You crouch, listening carefully. It sounds off. A kind of hiccup in the rhythm. Not a blockage. Not yet. Just something interfering. You reach into your satchel and pull out a small branch with a tied cloth. Your makeshift flow dipper. You lower it into the water. It drags slightly, then jolts forward. Not good. You shine your torch and peer closer. There, snagged in a narrow groove, is a lump of what appears to be soaked papyrus and olives. Again, you mutter a geared oath and reach in to dislodge it. The papyrus resists, swelling like it still believes it's part of the Senate. You finally pry it free and toss it into a side basket marked Miscellaneous Floaters. A bit of water rushes forward as the blockage clears. The sound evens out. Flavius would call it a relieved sigh. You just call it functional. Historians still argue whether aqueduct inspectors were expected to remove debris or simply report it. You've always assumed that if you find it, it's yours. Kind of like catching an eel with your teeth. You just commit. Your wax tablet is now entirely unwritable, so you carve a brief note into the soft stone above the joint. Cleared olive scroll. Flow stable. You etch a little spiral beside it. Your new symbol for unexpected detour. You make your way toward the final stop, passing through a quiet alley behind a perfume seller's stall. The scent of crushed roses and burnt cinnamon fills the air, a strange contrast to the wet, stony smell of your work. You pause for a moment, letting the warm aroma drift past. The last reading point lies beside a vine-covered stairwell. The evening light has faded now, and you light your torch fully. The glow bounces along the aqueduct channel, glinting off the water like lazy gold coins tumbling past. You kneel one last time. You place your palm flat on the stone. Cool. Good. You listen. Flowing even. You breathe in. No sulfur, no garlic, no mildew. Just the faintest scent of moss and dusk. You close your eyes and let the hum of the water fill your ears. Sometimes, in these quiet moments, you imagine the water speaking to you, not in words, but in pulses, in steady, flowing presence. It tells you that the city still drinks, that the fountains still pour, that somewhere a boy just filled his jug and ran home before curfew. You smile and mark the final reading. It's a clean end to the day. The wax is unusable, but your memory is sharp enough, at least until dinner. You'll rewrite it all before sleep. As you stand and stretch, your spine makes a noise like old rope. The stars are just beginning to emerge. Rome glows in pockets of lamplight and fire. Voices drift upward, soft arguments, soft laughter, the clink of ceramic and echo of footsteps on stone. And beneath it all, still running, always running, your old companion, the water, as twilight settles into the cracks between rooftops and the last pink slivers of sun vanish behind distant hills. You turn toward the tunnel section most inspectors quietly avoid. Officially, it's known as Segment 9 Gamma. Unofficially, it's that creepy one with the lizard. You reach it by following a side path through an old service courtyard littered with broken amphorae, discarded rope, and a pile of bricks that's been temporarily stored there since Emperor Domitian's reign. You duck beneath a low arch and step into a narrow corridor lined with damp, echoing stone. The air here is different, cooler, more still. Your torch crackles louder, casting flickering light against the tunnel walls. The water hums below the stone channel, consistent but oddly muffled. You take a breath and descend a few paces, and then you see it. The lizard, same spot as always, perched on the raised seam of the left-hand wall, just above a mossy patch, shaped uncannily like Italy. The creature is about the length of your forearm, speckled, slightly too plump, and wholly unbothered by your presence. You've passed by it at least a dozen times, and each time it meets your gaze with the serenity of a retired oracle. Tonight, it tilts its head slightly. Evening, you whisper, as if it understands. You crouch and begin your inspection routine, but your eyes flick back to the lizard more than once. It doesn't blink. It just watches. You've started to wonder whether it's a real animal or some kind of guardian spirit assigned to this stretch. Historians still argue whether Roman engineers acknowledged tunnel fauna in official records. You're inclined to believe they did. Silently, superstitiously, and with polite respect. The walls here are old, older than most of what you've seen today. These stones were laid when the Republic still had breath in its lungs. The mortar is cracked but dry, the seams jagged but stable. You run your palm along the base, pausing when your fingertips catch on a groove not present last week. You lean closer, a hairline crack, barely visible, the kind that says, "Nothing to worry about now, but ask me again after 3 rainstorms." You mark it with a small arrow and the word monitor. Then, for reasons you can't quite explain, you draw a tiny lizard beside it. You glance at your watch lizard, who has not moved. The water here is slower, pushed along a bend that makes the channel hum with a subtle, bass-like thrum. You place your ear against the stone and listen. It's one of your favorite sounds. Not the sharp clink of city life, not the shriek of a bathhouse tantrum, just a quiet vibration of purpose. The aqueduct doesn't boast. It doesn't complain. It flows. Day after day, leak after leak. You close your eyes and let the thrum settle into your chest. A kind of meditation, really. You wonder, not for the first time, how many other inspectors have crouched here before you, torch flickering, notebook in hand, listening for that same sound. You imagine one named Lucius, or maybe Alia. Perhaps she was the one who scratched her name faintly into the cornerstone by the bend. The letters are there, barely visible. A-E-L. You touch them gently. You make your final notes, roll your wax tablet carefully, and rise slowly. Your knees complain. Your back protests. But the day's last major task is done. You turn to leave, pausing just long enough to nod to the lizard. "Keep an eye on it," you say quietly. As you exit the tunnel, the outside air feels warm and heavy, like Rome is exhaling after a long day. You glance up at the stars, which have multiplied while you worked in the dark. The moon hangs low, sleepy and golden, reflecting in a puddle by your feet. You walk a familiar route back toward the depot, cutting through a courtyard where the laundry has long since been taken in. The path is quiet, save for one cat trotting past, with something mysterious in its mouth. Possibly a fish, possibly a sandal. You pass an old fountain, a smaller one, tucked behind a columned porch. The water still flows, softly. It's fed by the channel you just inspected. You smile. A young girl and her grandmother are filling a jar. The girl looks up as you approach, then looks away again. The grandmother nods once. That's all. No words, just a shared glance between those who use the water and those who guard it. At the depot, Flavius is already there, polishing his stylus, like he plans to sell it. He lifts his head as you approach. You see her? He asks. You don't need to ask who. Same spot, you say. He nods thoughtfully. She likes you. You hang your torch and settle onto the stone bench. The night is warm. The depot is quiet. For a few minutes, you sit in a companionable silence, sharing dried apricots and the kind of thoughts that don't need saying aloud. Then, you both begin rewriting your notes, slowly, carefully, before the wax cools too much to shape. Dinner in your household is rarely exciting, and tonight is no exception. You arrive home with tired legs and a satchel full of wax residue. The street outside your door is quiet, save for the occasional creak of a passing cart and the rhythmic splash of water from a nearby public basin. You unlock the door with a push. It sticks a little, as always, and step inside. The smell hits you immediately. Barley again. Overcooked, underseasoned, and somehow both dry and soggy. You close the door gently behind you and hang your satchel on the crooked peg by the entrance. Your spouse looks up from the cooking fire, eyes tired, hair pulled back in a way that suggests practicality has won the day again. You're late, they say, not unkindly. Sulfur bloom, plus a scroll emergency, you reply, slipping out of your sandals and flexing your aching toes. They nod, as though you just mentioned a minor delay at the market. I save the crispy bits. You appreciate the thought. The crispy bits are your favorite. You sit at the low table and rub your temples while the food is ladled into two mismatched bowls. As you eat, your neighbor's voice drifts through the thin, shared wall. He's talking about the aqueduct again, loudly, to anyone who'll listen, or perhaps just to the ghost of his mother-in-law. It's cursed, I'm telling you. Every time my bread fails to rise, the water outside has bubbles. You sigh and take another bite of barley. It tastes exactly like boiled lint, but fills your stomach. Your spouse smiles wryly. He thinks your water's haunted. He thinks everything's haunted, you mutter. Last week it was the step stool. They snort. To be fair, it did collapse dramatically. After dinner, you scrape your bowl clean and stare at the cooling embers of the fire. Outside, night has fully settled, and the familiar night chorus begins. Dogs barking distantly, owls hooting with theatrical precision, the occasional muffled laugh from a nearby tavern. You pull out your wax tablet and begin rewriting your smudged notes. It's a soothing ritual. You warm the wax slightly near the embers, scrape a fresh surface, and gently etch each observation. Crack on west wall. Flow steady in segment 9. Lizard still present. Your spouse peers over your shoulder. Did you draw a frog again? It was relevant, you reply. It was in the tunnel. They nod, satisfied. Just don't draw a cursed one. You look up. What would a cursed frog look like? Probably a normal frog, but smug. You smile and keep writing. The neighbor continues his monologue. The aqueduct groans. It's angry. And don't tell me it's just pressure changes. I know a ghost when I hear one. Your spouse chuckles. You should tell him his house is over a buried cistern. Really push him over the edge. I need him to keep paying rent. You finish your tablet, blow gently on the wax to set it, and lean back with a groan. Your bones crack like firewood. I'm getting reassigned tomorrow, you say, half hopeful. Your spouse raises an eyebrow. Oh, latrine district. They wince. Yikes. I'm going to appeal. Offer figs. Bribery with style. You nod solemnly. It's the only way. You both sit quietly for a while, watching the fire shrink. The room dims as the last bit of flame flickers out. Outside, the city hums its nighttime lullaby. You know every sound now. The creak of a wheelbarrow too close to the wall, the soft splash of a misaligned spout, the clink of someone reheating wine over a brazier. You rise and prepare for bed. Your blanket smells faintly of laurel and something else. Maybe dust. You don't mind. The mattress creaks beneath you as you lie down and stretch your legs out fully, for the first time since midday. Just as your eyes start to close, there's a knock at the door. A frantic, uneven knock. You groan and sit up. Your spouse mumbles something unintelligible and pulls the blanket over their head. You stumble to the door and open it just enough to peer out. A courier stands there, panting, eyes wide, tunic askew. There's a leak, he gasps. Urgent, midnight shift. You rub your eyes. Where? Temple District, near the goat statue. You exhale slowly. Of course. You turn back toward your satchel. Don't forget the torch. Your spouse calls sleepily from under the blanket. You grab it, relight it, and step out into the night. Again, the midnight air clings to your skin like a damp curtain as you make your way toward the Temple District, torch flickering against the closely packed buildings. The city is quieter now, but not asleep. Rome never truly sleeps. Somewhere nearby, a cat yowls with operatic flair, and further off, a chorus of half-drunken laughter echoes from a tavern that should have closed hours ago. You follow the courier's vague directions. By the goat statue, near the square, under that arch with the crack that looks like a fish. You know the one. Everyone knows the goat statue. No one remembers why it's there, and the goat itself seems offended by the mystery. When you arrive, you find the leak. It's not dramatic. There's no gushing torrent, no fallen masonry, no panicked priest waving incense at it. Just a quiet, steady drip from a low joint at the base of the wall, forming a shallow pool that glistens in the moonlight. You kneel and examine the seam. It's warm to the touch. Unusual for this part of the channel. The water runs clear, but carries a faint metallic tang. Possibly iron. Possibly just time. You lower your torch, casting long shadows across the stone. The statue looms overhead, goat-shaped, slightly off-center, eternally unimpressed. You unpack your tools. You have exactly what you need. A bit of waxed cloth, a small clay plug, and the emergency sealing clay that smells faintly of old cheese. You roll it between your palms, press it into the leak, and smooth the edges. The drip slows. The seam darkens slightly as the clay sets. You sit back on your heels and wait. Historians still argue whether night work for aqueduct inspectors was officially sanctioned or simply tolerated. You're inclined to believe the latter based on the sheer lack of lanterns and support provided. A figure approaches from the other side of the plaza, holding a dim lantern. It's the local custodian, an elderly man with a hunched back and a beard that looks like it belongs to a small, wise goat. You again, he grumbles. Leak, you reply. He nods. I heard it dripping earlier. Thought maybe it was the gods. Turns out it's just calcium fatigue, he grunts. That's how it starts. He sits beside you, pulling out a heel of bread and tearing it in half. Eat, he says, handing you the larger piece. It's dry, but comforting. You eat in silence, watching the clay patch settle into its new home. The stars overhead are unusually bright tonight, sharp pinpricks of light in the inky black. A soft wind stirs the dust along the street. You both chew slowly, like people who've learned there's no rush when nothing is on fire. Used to be, the custodian says between bites. People came here to thank the water spirits. Offerings, incense, songs. Now, it's just you patching holes while goats stare at you. You look up at the statue. The goat does indeed appear to be judging you. It's a living, you say. He chuckles softly. You ever think of doing something else? You finish the last bite of bread. Sometimes. Then I remember other jobs have supervisors. He laughs, a slow, gravelly wheeze that echoes off the stone. You pack up your tools. The leak is sealed for now. You'll need to return tomorrow with a full repair crew. But tonight, you've done what you can. The custodian rises with a groan and dusts off his robes. If it leaks again, I'll blame the goat. Fair, you say, shouldering your satchel. You walk the long route home, avoiding the shortcut through the lower market, because you don't want to step in wine again. The torch burns lower, the shadows grow longer, and your thoughts begin to soften around the edges. You think of the water, still flowing beneath the city, through cracks and bends, through tunnels and shadows, through all the places no one notices, but everyone depends on. You think of the torch in your hand, slowly melting the wax at its base. You think of the goat statue. You think of your blanket. When you finally reach your door, the moon is high, and the city is finally quiet. You open the door gently, stepping inside without waking anyone. The fire is low, but still warm. You set your tools down softly and remove your sandals with a practiced sigh. You lie down, the mattress groaning under your weight, and pull the blanket over your shoulders. Your spouse mumbles, "Leak?" "Goat," you whisper. They grunt. "Figures." You close your eyes. Outside, the water flows on. The next morning begins with a cloudless sky and the distant caw of an especially judgmental crow perched on your neighbor's roof. You rise slowly, every joint issuing its own private protest. The clay patch held through the night, but you're expected to revisit the site with a proper team and reinforce the seal. As you sip tepid barley tea, soothing in theory, bland in reality, you catch yourself staring at the table, thinking about the coast. You've never lived near the sea, but the town of Ostia has called to you more often these days. Fewer leaks, more fish, salty air, an aqueduct inspector's dream. Thinking again, your spouse asks from behind you. Dreaming of Ostia, you say. They lean against the wall, folding a linen rag. What would you do there? Inspect salt water, you reply, almost convincing yourself. Or retire and sell sandals. They smile. You'd get bored in a week. 2 weeks, you say, stretching. Maybe 3. As you gather your gear and lace your sandals, a tiny plan forms in your head. If you can get through the next 5 inspections, complete the goat leak paperwork, and avoid Flavius for a few hours, you'll stop by the recruiting office and inquire about Ostia transfers. Just to ask, your path back to the temple district is familiar now. You nod to the same cart vendor, sidestep the same mysterious puddle that no rain has ever created, and pass the same mural of a donkey playing the lyre. A bizarre but somehow uplifting image. Flavius appears halfway up the steps, eating something that looks like an undercooked pastry. I heard the goat was involved, he says by way of greeting. You grunt. It watched, judged, did nothing. Just like the Senate, he replies. The repair crew is waiting by the plaza. 2 young apprentices and a sullen fellow named Titus, who claims he's allergic to water, but refuses to leave the aqueduct service. You brief them quickly, show them the clay patch, and begin reinforcing the seam with fresh mortar and a bronze wedge. Titus mumbles something about divine retribution. You hand him the trowel and suggest he repent while applying sealant. As you work, your mind wanders again to Ostia. You picture a modest home near the shore, early mornings with sea fog, late evenings sipping diluted wine with no pipes in sight. You even imagine a carved plaque that reads, "Former Inspector, ask me nothing." But then you're drawn back to the task at hand. The seam is nearly done. The apprentices chatter about last night's bathhouse debacle, something about a collapsing shelf of oils. Flavius contributes a theory involving cursed olive jars and misaligned stars. You nod, smoothing mortar with slow, even pressure. You glance down at your wax tablet, already streaked with fingerprints and flour smudges from Flavius' snack. You jot, leak resolved, reinforced, goat passive. With the job complete, you begin your next task, an odd little assignment involving a cracked side duct near the outskirts of the grain depot. It's a quieter walk, and you use the time to hum a tune you barely remember, something your grandmother used to sing while darning tunics. It has no lyrics, just an endless, meandering melody that helps your mind drift gently across time. You arrive at the side duct to find it exactly as described, cracked, leaking slightly, surrounded by 3 pigeons who seem deeply invested in your arrival. One of them has a piece of straw in its beak and looks like it's trying to construct a judgmental nest. The crack itself is manageable. You kneel, clean the area, and begin applying plaster. As you work, you recite the steps aloud, not because you need to, but because it soothes you. Scrape, smooth, press, hold, breathe, repeat. This mantra has seen you through storms, arguments, broken tools, and one deeply unfortunate incident involving a lost tunic and a collapsing ladder. Historians still argue, whether Roman aqueduct repairs followed a formal chant, or if that was just a habit picked up by particularly poetic inspectors. Either way, you find it useful. As the plaster sets, you sit back and lean against the stone. The sun has warmed the surface pleasantly. The pigeons, satisfied with your work, flutter away. A cart rolls past on the road above, rattling with amphorae. A child runs after it, laughing. You watch, then close your eyes. Ostia. You think again of the coast. Maybe next season. Maybe after the inspections. Maybe once the paperwork quiets down. Maybe once someone else learns to read your frog symbols. You smile to yourself. For now, you're still here. Still patching leaks, smoothing cracks, listening to stones that rarely thank you, but always remember. The plaster holds, the water flows, and the city, unseen and unaware, keeps drinking. You've barely returned from the side duct repair when you spot a clerk running toward the depot with arms full of scrolls and the panicked gait of someone who forgot to double knot their sandals. The moment your eyes meet, he veers in your direction. That's never good. Aquarius, he gasps, scrolls jostling in his grip. You've been reassigned. You blink, not entirely sure you heard correctly. Reassigned? He nods rapidly, unfurling a scroll with far too much drama for a midday notice. Effective immediately. Segment Supervisor Maxentius requires aqueduct personnel to be temporarily reallocated to the sanitation division, specifically latrine flow assessment. Your jaw tightens. Latrines. He offers a weak shrug. There's a blockage, and someone wrote your name on the duty board. You know exactly who did it. Flavius, likely as a joke, or because of a game of dice you didn't know you were playing. Either way, it's real now. You shuffle toward the assigned site with all the enthusiasm of a goat headed toward a haircut. The latrine complex in question lies near the southern forums, a sprawling marble-clad facility favored by the wealthier sort who like their relief accompanied by gossip and heated floors. The problem lies in the runoff trench. There's a blockage somewhere between the upper grate and the filtration stones. You approach the entry hatch and take a moment to breathe through your mouth. It smells exactly like you feared it would. You crouch and peer into the grate. A trickle of dark water pushes through, but there's a sluggishness to the flow. You tap the wall gently. The echo is dull. You sigh and open your satchel. You have the necessary tools. Long-handled scraper, waxed gloves, a slightly judgmental expression, but none of the motivation. Thought you retired, a voice says behind you. You turn to see Flavius, holding a small basket of figs and grinning like a mosaic villain. You signed me up for this, you say flatly. I signed us up, he corrects. Teamwork. You don't respond. You just hand him a pair of gloves. The work is messy, as expected. The blockage turns out to be a tangle of discarded cloth, a broken comb, and something that might have once been a pastry. You clear it slowly, methodically, with a kind of mental detachment that allows you to remain upright. I've seen worse, Flavius says cheerfully. Remember the time with the hairpin disaster? Don't remind me. The worst part isn't the smell. It's the knowledge that someone probably wrote a poem while sitting directly above you. You finish clearing the blockage, scrub your tools, and signal the nearby maintenance scribe to note the repair. He grimaces and writes in tiny, reluctant script. You return to the depot with your dignity in tatters and a strong desire for soap. Instead, you find your solution waiting in a woven basket on your bench. Figs, not just figs, fresh, perfectly ripe, with a tiny note folded underneath. You're off latrine duty. Consider this a bribe. Flavius, you chuckle despite yourself. You'll never admit it, but he knows exactly how to win you over. You eat one fig slowly, savoring its sweetness. The depot's shadows grow longer as the sun dips below the rooftops. Rome shifts toward evening mode. Lighter footsteps, softer voices, the smell of grilled onions drifting on the breeze. You sit back, stretch your legs, and think once more of Ostia. Not yet, but someday. For now, there's one more inspection to finish. The final task before sleep. You gather your gear, brush the worst of the grime from your tunic, and head toward the northern branch of the system where your last report awaits. The walk is quiet. The sky turns lavender. A few early stars blink into view. You pass the same baker's alley where earlier someone burned their loaves. Now it smells perfect. Someone plays a flute nearby, the melody drifting like a lazy ribbon through the cooling air. You pause at a small plaza fountain, fed by the system you just patched. The water flows freely now, clear and cold. A young boy fills a jug. He looks up, nods once, and runs home. You touch the fountain's edge, as you always do. A small gesture, a silent vow. The water still flows. Your notes are complete. Your satchel is lighter, and your stomach, blessedly, no longer smells like sulfur and mystery. Tomorrow may be the same, or maybe a little less latrine. Your final task for the day, and possibly the most symbolically satisfying, is to submit your last report, not just for the day, but as it turns out, your final official report as a Roman Aqueduct Inspector. You arrive at the Central Registry Office, a domed structure tucked beside a civic basilica, its entrance marked by a marble lintel that boasts, "Order in water is order in Rome." You mutter the phrase under your breath, half in mockery, half in agreement. It's more or less true. Inside, the air is thick with dust and quiet muttering. A dozen other inspectors are already there, hunched over desks, scraping notes onto wax or staring longingly at empty ink pots. You take your place at your usual corner desk. Wobbly, always slightly damp, but dependable. You unroll your wax tablet one last time and begin transferring your final observations onto the official vellum. The script is slow and methodical. You note every crack, every patch, every frog. You include the sulfur bloom, the goat leak, the mysterious papyrus blockage, and the dreams of Ostia, all in careful, looping letters. Flavius appears halfway through, balancing a small clay cup of date wine and humming tunelessly. He drops into the seat beside you and watches for a moment. "You writing your memoirs?" he asks. "My legacy?" you reply without looking up. Include the part where you fought sewer spirits with figs. I left that out. Coward. You finish the report with a simple closing line. Flow verified. Structures sound. Watch the lizard. You roll the vellum, tie it with a bit of twine, and place it in the submission basket. No one applauds. There's no ceremony. Just a basket, half full, already starting to slump under the weight of Rome's daily infrastructure. Still, as you place it there, you feel something lift. A soft click, internal and precise. You've done your part. Flavius nudges you with his elbow. Now what? You think for a moment. I might finally go see Ostia. He nods slowly. Bring back seashells, and don't drink the water. You step out into the twilight. Rome hums behind you. Soft wheels over stone. The murmur of evening prayers. The distant splash of fountains. You walk slowly, noticing things you rarely take time to see. The ivy creeping up the old market wall, the crack in the cobblestones, shaped like a lightning bolt, a small shrine lit by a single flickering lamp. You reach your usual overlook, just above the aqueduct's highest exposed arch. From here, you can see the city laid out like a lazy map. Domes and roofs, towers and alleys, and there, winding through it all, the great quiet flow of the water you've spent a life tending. You sit. Beneath your feet, the water still moves. Steady, patient, older than emperors, quieter than temples, more constant than the wind. You close your eyes. The wind brushes your cheek. A soft warmth lingers on the stones. In your mind, you walk the tunnels one more time, past the lizard, past the sulfur, past the squeaky valve, and the chalk-marked seams. You walk the channels, and the shadowy corridors, and the sunlit stretches, where figs dry on sloped tile roofs, and then, slowly, softly, word count. 1070, wind down, 300 words. Your thoughts begin to slow. The images blur into gentle patterns, stone fading into moss, water rippling into sky, cracks turning into harmless lines on a weathered palm. You feel the weight of the day release its hold. The sounds of the city stretching thin, like thread pulled through fabric. There's no urgency now, no scrolls to decipher, no frogs to catalog, just the soft hush of water flowing through memory and time. The stars are fully visible now, stitched carefully across the dark velvet of the night. They blink, slow and steady, like the beat of a city's unseen heart, and beneath it all, the water hums, a lullaby of aqueducts, a song for those who walk forgotten paths with quiet dignity. Your breathing matches the rhythm of that flow, in and out, cool night air, warm stone beneath, the stillness of a job finished, of a city held together by tiny, unseen acts. You're not thinking anymore, just drifting, floating on a current of memory and marble, through tunnels where silence lives, past arches that remember every touch of your hand. The water flows, the stone holds, and in this quiet corner of the eternal city, you finally rest.